Welcome to the Podcast of Power, the only Lord of the Rings of Power podcast on the internet. 100% medically accurate. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me, of course, is Mr. Chris Stachiw.
Udûn.
I prefer to be called Uruk. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
That's a little racist.
He was just walking around calling us Uruk over and over again.
Udûn. Yeah, the name of the episode, Udûn. It's like a type of noodle, right? Buckwheat noodle?
I wanted to message you on Facebook so bad. I'd be like, why do they keep talking about noodle?
Well, why is it called Udûn when they keep saying nam pat?
Udûn is the name of the mountain.
Oh.
Udûn.
Mount Doom.
So, Udûn is the valley that becomes Mordor. So Udûn is where Udûn, as we find out very quickly in this episode, is a very important part of the world, ladies and gentlemen.
Do you mean Mordor?
Oh, Mordor. I love it. I mean, look, that there is a whole thing. There are a couple of YouTube creators who make really well done J.R.R. Tolkien content, but they pronounce the Quenya correctly, and they really are like Sauron. And it's, they trill the R's. Look, it's a real language. George R. R. Martin, Jesus Christ. Speaking of real languages and fake languages, J.R.R. Tolkien. That's a whole thing. He was a linguist, so the Quenya language is a real thing.
Yeah, his wife was very lucky. We can swear on this podcast, right?
Can we? Yeah, we were supposed to. Yeah, sorry. No swearing on pod. Yeah, fucking get out of here. We're so close to the end of the show. It doesn't even feel like it, but apparently we are.
Well, we have the joining of two storylines. We have no Harfoots or dwarves to be seen, but we've got two of our main elf characters coming together. We've got a battle that rivals Helm's Deep. No, it's not.
We have idiot orcs. We have dumb orcs. That's what we have.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of cannon fodder humans because this battle that takes place through this episode, it is a multi-stage battle. You've got your mini boss, your other mini boss, your big boss, and basically the humans lose. Sorry, but they're not doing too good because apparently, however many years ago, they came up with this ingenious plan where that sword we've been talking about, that Morgul blade, it just unlocks a little thing that unlocks all kinds of, breaks a dam, all kinds of water comes in. And don't you know, when you add water to lava, instant volcano.
Yeah. So when you add water to a volcano, it's a bunch of steam. And there you go. I don't know what to think. Like, here's the thing. We mentioned early on, like in the second or third episode, so like 3 episodes ago, I was like, hey, Mount Doom's going to explode in this show.
Oh, yeah.
Here we are. It has happened. And like, I don't think any one of us could have predicted how it was going to happen, but it makes sense in a way. Like, now I understand what the orcs have been doing this whole time. Right. And it makes sense. And you know what? Give this show credit where credit is due. I didn't see that coming. I didn't understand what was going on. Maybe there are people smarter than me out there. Well, you should have known. They're digging the trenches. Like, no way. They did a very good job of not letting us know what that sword did. What was the MacGuffin, essentially, the 6-episode MacGuffin. Like, they didn't let us know what the point of it was. And now that I understand what the point of it was, okay. Like, yeah. Sure.
And what did Adar say? He's like, hey, orc brother, I'm going to hook you up so you don't have to worry about walking around in the daylight anymore, because he does create basically an eternal night right around Mordor. So, yeah, man of his word.
Yeah. And, the other thing that I really appreciated about this episode that I was not expecting, way to make Adar kind of sympathetic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, Joseph Mawley, up until this point, he's been very like mustache twirling villain, like, oh, kill this kid to prove your loyalty to us. Now it's like, almost seems like he is put upon, like he's doing this out of a sense of like obligation to the orcs. Cause he, something that we've never had any explanation in Lord of the Rings up until now, though I think I mentioned it because it's part of the source material. Orcs are fallen elves. And now in the show, they've gone and mentioned it. And he is he's one of the original Uruk. Adar is.
Mhm.
And that's a big thing that's never been mentioned in the movies up until this point.
And it makes sense now, his name too.
Right. Because
Yeah.
he's an elf.
Right.
He is
And
an elf. He's a fallen elf.
Well, and he's the father of the orcs. So
right. He's one of the original Uruk.
Yeah, exactly. Somehow he manages to help progenitate these orcs. I was thinking that he was planting them because we saw the Urukai coming out of the ground, and we see that scene at the beginning where he's planting these seeds, but then they call back to that later on when it's like, oh, you plant these seeds before battle in order to kind of replenish the woods and all this. Oh, well, that's kind of cool. This actually, it moves along. I watched this episode twice now. The first time it took a little bit to get going just because it is so multi-stage as far as like, okay, now the tower fell. All right. And now we're over here. Oh, we took care of all these people. Wait a second. They're actually humans. Oh, my bad. And then we get to the final stage and it's like, oh, we're fucked. So it just moves pretty good. The second time I watched it, I was like, oh, wow, this is just blazing along.
Well, and that's the other thing about this that I wasn't expecting is you have a converging of the storylines. Like they're coming from Numenor and then they're there.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering how fast those boats move. I was also wondering how many horses are in those boats, man. Because man,
apparently
they got a lot of horses at the end there.
A friend of the show and watcher of the show, Father Malone, and I were talking about it, and he mentioned it seemed a little Ride of the Rohirrim-y.
Oh, very much. I was looking for them at the dawn of the fifth day type of thing.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it makes sense from a style standpoint to show it that way, but yeah, there's logistically, it's like this. Some of this doesn't make any sense. I really didn't think that they were that close to one another either, because they're just, you see them riding, and then all of a sudden they're there where the conflict is with Bronwyn and Arondir, and it's like, whoa. That's I think for me, even though Mount Doom exploded this episode, the thing that was most surprising for me was the fact that now these storylines have officially converged. And Arondir and Bronwyn and all of those humans are saved by Isildur and Elendil and Galadriel. I was not expecting Galadriel and Arondir to interact by the end of this first season. Did you?
Well, and then I like how he's just like, oh, that's Galadriel. She's the king of the northern, or the general of the northern armies. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess everybody knows everybody. That's pretty cool.
Well, she's famous, right? I mean, it's we see when they were in Numenor. I mean, you see them with puppets of Galadriel, right? Because they're thousands of years old. So
right.
I just wasn't expecting it that quickly. Mm-hmm. But now that we're at this point, it opens up this show in a lot more ways. Because now it's like, well, now the thing I was expecting to take place in season 2 or 3 is already here. Like Galadriel and Arondir and Bronwyn, they're already all together. Like, whoa, that presents a lot of interesting directions for the show to go now.
Well, and it was very odd how quickly Halbrand is there. And it's just like, oh, you need somebody to take this burden off of your shoulders? Well, actually, we got your forgotten king over here. Let me just reinstate him right now.
Yeah,
okay.
I didn't know what to think of that. I think there's this idea in my mind that there's some big twist with his character, and I think everybody who's watching the show is kind of expecting something in that vein, like a big twist, or he is someone that we know from movies / source material already. So he could, I mean, we've talked about the Witch King of Angmar. Maybe he's not a villainous character. I don't know. Yeah, there was a little bit
you still wonder how he got on that raft, and he makes mention of that, like, not that noble, You don't know how I got on that raft. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I don't know what to think of the Halbrand character. He's an interesting character because, again, like we have that scene in Numenor where he's breaking dudes' arms and he's like, I'm Halbrand. And it's like, that's the same character now that we're supposed to be, I guess, like rooting for. I don't understand. I guess I don't understand. What are we supposed to think of the Halbrand character is my question. Because the last time he was doing anything on his own, he was breaking the arms and legs of men in Numenor who were assaulting him. And now he's a hero. I can't figure out what the show is trying to get us to understand about his character.
Right. And then I'm very curious what Adar did to him I was waiting for him to be like, do you remember me? And Adar's just like, I have no idea who you are. Just that classic villain, just put down, like, I might have ruined your family, taken, everything from you, but you're just so insignificant. I don't even know your name.
And he does it. I mean, he hits him with it. I mean, it's very Thanos, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where they're going with the Halbrand character. I don't know, because it seemed like they were going one direction, and maybe it's not that. I hope that he's not. I see, like, he's supposed to be Aragorn, is what it feels like, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. But he is way more chaotic evil. I mean, I would think that, like, Aragorn's more like lawful neutral type of character.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. Halbrand, it's weird. Like I haven't gotten a sense of who his character is, and the show I don't think has done a very good job of giving us an opportunity to get an insight to his characters. Maybe that's coming, but we're supposed to have been shown kind of opposing ideas about him. At once he saves Galadriel, and another time he's just breaking dudes' arms and want and abandoned. Like, are we supposed to feel sympathetic for this character? Are we supposed to be? I don't know. He's an interesting character, because a lot of these other characters were not invented for the show. These are characters where we know where they're going. So like Halbrand and Arondir and Bronwyn, like, they don't have a source material counterpart. So like with the Harfoots, like, we know that the Harfoots existed, but we don't know specific characters. And so I think, like with Doran or with Galadriel, like, we know what happens, but with the non-source material characters, that wiggle room is what is exciting about this show, because that's where the twist comes from, are characters that we don't know. And I think the twist works in this episode. I don't know. I didn't expect it. Did you? Which
twist are you talking about?
The twist that the sword was gone. That the villains succeed. I mean, the best of the hero's abilities, they can't stop it from happening.
I mean, I knew something was up as soon as he came out of the little house and was just like, hey, human trader guy, I've got a task for you. And I was like, oh, he's doing the old switch. So when they were carrying around the sword the sword, quote unquote, in the little cloth, I was just like, that's not the sword in there. I was just like yelling at my TV, just cut that open. Look at it. It's not the sword.
See, I didn't pick up on it. I don't know why. Normally, I'm like yourself, pretty adept at picking up on those things. But I think it's to the show's credit. The pace of this episode is so fast that it doesn't give you a lot of time to sit with the characters. It's really about this conflict between Adar and Arondir and Bronwyn. And I think those scenes inside of the kind of tavern are pretty good. Like, they have a fair amount of tension. I mean, I guess we don't know if Bronwyn's going to die. I assumed she's going to be around for a lot longer, but there was a moment in this episode I was like, are they just going to kill her? Like, I guess I don't know where this show is going. So they don't, but there was a fair amount of tension in that scene, I felt.
I agree. I like that they brought back the whole thing with the seeds and the burning and all that, though it was kind of bogue to make that kid burn his own mother.
It's one of these things where they introduce it at the beginning of the episode and then it comes back into play later in the episode. Like, you can introduce it earlier in the show. It doesn't have to be the same episode. It's I don't know. I always have an issue with that kind of storytelling and stuff where it's like, you don't have to introduce it the same episode. It could be planted 2 or 3 episodes ago, especially in a show where it's like on a previous episode of Rings of Power.
Exactly. And then you watch that and you're just like, oh, this is going to come back. Oh, there's a reason why they showed us this shot. Okay.
I remember in Game of Thrones, the episode where there's a big, like, seasons long twist revealed. And they did that whole, like, on a previous Game of Thrones. And they referenced something that was like 4 seasons ago. And you're like, finally, it's happening this episode. And if you didn't know that it was coming beforehand, you never would have known. So they like gave it away immediately. Yeah, it sucks to be a smart fan is what it feels like in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of funny because on She-Hulk this week, she actually makes a reference to, do you even remember who this character is? We should do a previously on. And then she just like breaks the fourth wall and they suddenly do a previously on and they reintroduce this character. And you're like, oh, okay, this is that guy. All right. Because like she's right. And the writers are right. There was no way I was going to remember who this one very small character was that showed up like 4 episodes ago. And they keep referencing this attack in the opening previously on. And I'm like, is this ever going to come back? Like at some point, we're going that one creepy guy that she was on that blind date with, he's going to come back. And I know that he's got to have something to do with this, that, and the other thing. So yeah, it does suck being a smart fan. I do try sometimes just skip the previously ons. Like with this show being on Amazon, I'm like, okay, skip the commercials. All right, skip the previously on. All right, skip these credits. They go on for way too long. Just like take me to the show.
Oh yeah, it would be 3 skips. Yeah. I don't know. Like in the day and age of streaming, I almost feel like they don't need previously ons.
Yeah.
That's like a TV show over the air, terrestrial TV show thing, right?
Well, it's funny because when you're binging something, they will generally just skip that, which is nice. But since we're not binging this, since we're watching this week by week, then we're getting the previously on and we're getting the preview at the end. But when we go back and we rewatch this, we won't get any of that. It'll just feel like one long 8-hour plus movie.
Well, and I think that this episode, more so than definitely the last one, this one really feels very Peter Jackson-y.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, You're right with the Rohirrim and just the way that the battles are. What was up with that orc with the knife in his eye? And when he pulls out the knife, the orc is bleeding, but the blood doesn't look right to me. It looked almost like big globules. I thought like he hit a jackpot. Like it almost felt like black coins were coming out of the orc's eye. It's like, what the fuck is that?
I honestly, the issue I had with that scene, and we've talked about it once already with the show, is like, that's mighty convenient.
Oh, yeah.
He's struggling and he's struggling and he's struggling. Arondir is about to be stabbed by this giant orc. And he's struggling and the knife is getting closer and closer. And then she saves him right as he is literally about to die. Like 1 second later and he's dead. I don't like that storytelling convention. I'm sick of it.
Yeah. We keep getting the arrow or sword through the back type of thing.
You know he's going to get saved. I don't understand why you would do that in this story when it's been made very apparent that Arondir is a character that's going to be sticking around for quite some time.
I was thinking that was going to be the moment when the ships come sailing into the harbor, thinking that they were still on their ships. Like the ships would come sailing in and they'd be like, that elf is being attacked by an orc.
Oh,
and they take care of them. And I'm like, oh, this is where the 2 storylines are going to match up, because the way that they end up finally marrying doesn't feel right, because that tavern is so dark. It feels like nighttime. And then the horse riders are riding in the daytime. And I'm just like, well, this doesn't make any sense timeline wise. I'm like, how is this going to match up? Because we're night and day literally here. And then when they come out of the tavern, it's like, oh, they just had no windows in that tavern. Okay. I mean, I guess it is their keep. So,
well, it's something that Game of Thrones did, and this show has now done it a little bit. Game of Thrones did it a lot in its 8th season. It stops caring about distances that the show has established. Like in Game of Thrones, you have characters going from one end of the map to the other end in one episode. And earlier on in the show's run, they spent, again, like I've mentioned to you before, they spend 3 seasons with one of the main characters in another place from the rest of the show. And it takes her 3 seasons to get to the rest of the characters. But then in the final season, she's just flying around everywhere, like going from A to B to C. And it's like a sense of time and space is important with TV because you have that amount of time. It's not a movie. In a movie, you don't question it unless you're being told to question it. In a TV show, especially one like this, where there's clearly a lot of room and a lot of land to cover, the Harfoots have been traveling all season, and juxtapose that against the Rohirrim stand-ins just showing up, literally just like showing up. And you're just like, oh, I guess they're here now. That's the most shocking thing. Like, I know Mount Doom exploding is one thing, but I was so surprised that they were already just there.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it makes sense.
Yeah, it's been a while since I had a map of Middle Earth up on my wall like I would have when I was a kid. Yeah, I'm like, time and distance, because Mordor is pretty far over to the east there. And if anything, I thought they would have been, again, like traveling in on the river and getting close and then jumping up. But we just kind of lose them for a while.
Well, I think that was their way of saying like, oh, they're traveling is by not showing them. And it's like, I don't like that either. Cause then that's just like, well, we're just going to let you fill in the gaps. And they were just traveling the whole time. I'm not a fan of that either. Cause it's lazy or it's over-explanatory, I guess. I don't know. There's a happy medium there. I feel like if we had seen nothing of them all episode and it had all taken place at the village where they were fighting, where Adar and Arondir were fighting and Bronwyn was all that, and that if that were longer and almost the whole episode, it would have been impactful when they show up at the end. Because you're like, oh, right. You just show them leave. They don't even show them landing. So I don't understand why they couldn't have just waited all episode to show them. It didn't make any sense because the scene with Galadriel and Isildur is not much of anything.
Right. Doesn't really establish much, though we're talking a lot about Isildur's mom in this episode.
Right. Like, who's your mom? Where is your mom? What's your mom doing? And again,
say hi to your mother for me.
Galadriel hints at Isildur being more important in the grand scheme of things. But again, like that's not fun either. One character talking cryptically to another about things they know are going to happen. Like, come on, J.J. Abrams. Like, you don't have to withhold all the information from us just because we're the audience. And I don't know. Like, they don't do a lot of effort in giving Isildur much. They still haven't given him much of a character. We're on the 6th episode now. We've seen him in 3 or 4 of the last 6 episodes, and I still know very little about him. I don't care very much about him. I care more about his dad, Elendil, than I do about him. Yeah. And, I know that he's just as big of a character, if not bigger than Elendil in the grand scheme of the story, but it's not the actor's fault. I think the writing is just not serving his character. And again, given that he's ostensibly a main character, they should be doing better. Because I think I personally still am a huge fan of Arondir and Bronwyn, even if now it's been established that Bronwyn has a fair amount of plot armor.
Right.
Which just lazy and convenient.
I mean, now that she's not ostensibly the leader of the humans, of the Southlands, what's she going to be up to?
Right.
I'm very curious where she goes from here because I don't see her staying still. I mean, is she going to have to go on a quest now with Theo and Arondir? I mean, it feels like she's got to have something. And then there's always, the end of this episode is pretty damn devastating with this explosion. And, oh, God, all the fanboys complaining about, there's no way Galadriel could have just stood there and withstood the power of this volcano as it was blowing through. And I'm like, she's an elf. It's magic. Do whatever, as long as she's got the light, she's fine.
Well, I mean, I understand the complaint, but also like it's a magical TV show about elves. Yeah, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like everybody wants to find a reason to hate this show. Be my guest. Like at this point, there are plenty of real things to complain about. We just mentioned like 4 or 5 of them, legitimate concerns that you can have with this show, with pacing, with narrative structure, with use of tropes that have been used over and over again. Those are 3 things you can actually complain about and that you or I would probably 100% agree with. But bitching about the pyroclastic flow would kill an elf, like, yeah. Fuck you. Like, I'm sorry, but elves don't actually exist. Right. We're talking about a fantasy world. Like, don't understand what people want. What do big internet man babies want? Like, because whatever it is, just like they're not going to get it. So stop asking for it. Yeah. No one wants to kowtow to your bullshit and just everything. Once it's black dwarves, now it's pyroclastic flows not killing elves. Like the one thing that I didn't see enough people complaining about is the thing we talked about last episode, which is the mithril nonsense. Like, complain more about that, please, because that wasn't good and it's still not good. But like, gonna complain about Galadriel, an elf, not dying to a pyroclastic flow. I mean, I get it, but who cares? And man, what a way to end this episode, though, right? Like, what an absolute just banger of an ending. Like, I know you were kind of expecting the twist, but when the twist happens, like, holy cow. Like, I wasn't expecting the scope of what happened at the end of the episode. Because I have no idea where the show goes from here. Yeah. I don't even know who's alive anymore.
I don't know who's alive. I don't know who's dead. Who's got the diamonds? Yeah. It's going to be wild next week. I'm very, very excited to see what happens. And it's very strange because, again, we don't have a title for next week, but we do have a little thumbnail on the IMDb of just Galadriel looking at the camera, looking very sad with all of the soot and everything all around her in the big orange sky.
And that was what I had seen in the trailers, that everybody was like, Mount Doom is exploding this season, was that orange shot with her covered in ash. And yeah, it's every episode up until this point, it's been like, okay, there's a little bit of a teaser at the end. There's a little bit of a cliffhanger, but this is like changes the show's complexion almost entirely, because what it feels like is probably the next episode is going to go back and show us everything from the Harfoots and the elves that aren't there and the dwarfs. It's probably going to show us that and then bring us back with the final episode to like the fallout from after this episode's ending. And I hope, and that would make sense because we don't know what the Harfoots are doing, but they're in the Southlands. We don't know what Durin and the elves are doing, but this is going to affect them too. Yeah, I don't know. I'm glad that now I understand why they left those stories out, because this episode would have felt like way too much if they had all 4 storylines in there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was, so I think I told you last week that Andrea just is like, I can't even pay attention. I don't know what's going on. So before this episode, I sat down with her and I was like, okay, there's 4 storylines. And I just ran through all 4 storylines, tried to give her the best recap that I possibly could. I was channeling my inner guy from Ant-Man, and I was just like, okay, well, there's this. And then when the episode started, I was like, oh, well, now we have 2 storylines. So now there's only 3 storylines that we have to worry about until this one breaks apart into 2, which I have a feeling it will.
Well, my question is, where does the show go from here? Because I guess my expectation was the show would end this season with Mount Doom exploding. And it has ended the 6th episode of 8 with Mount Doom exploding, which means there have to be at least one, possibly 2 episodes of fallout from what happened.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm excited to see where that goes, because there are a lot of possibilities for this story moving forward now that it's been established that Mount Doom is exploding within the first 6 episodes of a 5-year show. The stakes have been upped immediately. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden the stakes have been just cranked up to 11. They're like a 4 or a 5, but now we understand what the orcs were doing, why they were doing it. Adar survives ostensibly the explosion of Mount Doom. Here's the thing. I don't know how any of these characters could have survived.
Right.
Because Isildur and Elendil have to survive. That's non-negotiable. So how did they survive? It's I don't know. It's a lot of questions being asked in a short period of time. And I like that scene. I think that's the most Jackson-inspired scene that I've seen in the show so far, is that the shots of all the water going into, it's like that reminded me so much of like what Peter Jackson brought to this series, is just an eye for, I don't know, an eye for just interesting scenery, interesting landscapes, and a sense of, the story just keeps going. There's a sense of progression. You're not even getting a moment of like rest. All the characters are celebrating. It's like, just kidding. Like in the background, like there's more things going on and here we go. So I don't know, like it's the show is going at a pace I wasn't expecting, but I'm kind of glad it's not wasting a lot of time getting to because this is essentially the epilogue for the prologue for the story, right? Like I would say the show's probably going to hit its stride in the 2nd and 3rd seasons, as most TV shows do. But Mount Doom has to explode for a lot of things in this show to happen. Because we don't know who and where the fuck Sauron is. Because, oh, by the way, they mention that Adar killed him in this episode.
Right.
What does that mean? Like, what does that mean? I have no idea. Fanboys get angry. I don't know what that means.
Was he even telling the truth?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Killed him and took his woman.
It's, this show and the Game of Thrones show are very much mirrors of one another. But when I sit and watch both of them, I realize the scope of the shows are the same. It's the way that they're going about showing you the scope. In Game of Thrones, it's very much one family wreaking havoc on everybody. In this, it's the orcs wreaking havoc on everybody, but we get to see the little stories that are kind of unknowingly connected, and we're seeing kind of how they're being connected. And I think the next episode, we're going to really see the Harfoot connection to the story. And I don't think we're going to find out who the stranger is on the next episode, but we might get more clues as to who he is. He might be Sauron. I doubt it. I don't know. Like, we haven't, us not seeing him this episode was very smart because it gave this story time to breathe. I do think that the scene in the tavern goes on a little too long. I don't know about you. It's a little, I now understand that there were going to be a lot of characters with plot armor in this show. Bronwyn is one of them. Theo probably is not one with plot armor, but Arondir is. And Galad, and it's like some of the characters you understand can't die, but other ones like, Bronwyn, like would have been a lot of tension to have Bronwyn die. Like maybe there's more to her character in the future, and I'm sure there has to be, given that she doesn't die, but we're still, by the 7th episode of the season, at least the 6th one, none of the main characters have died yet. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see where they take us with this. And who knows? Maybe next episode they just start with, oh, by the way, stranger, we found your name here. It's this.
It's on your tag.
Right. Yeah. Oh, this whole time
Ralph
we didn't
Lauren.
think to look for the laundry mark. Yeah.
Calvin Klein. Just recycle that joke from Back to the Future. I will say, though, like this show still pretty good. Even after last week's kind of stumble, I think this is a really good episode of the show.
I agree. Yeah, the whole thing with the mithril is just, it's still stuck in my craw a little bit, but I'll get over it.
It's not great. Like I think for me, it is actively the worst thing about this show is the handling of mithril and like the weird backstory that they've concocted, because you didn't need to expound any further on something that was not needing to be explained more than it already was. You don't have to make it magical for the sake of being magical. It was already like, the thing that everybody wanted, nobody could find, only the dwarfs had access to, and there's a limited amount. Like that, why do you need any more than that? So I don't know. I think next episode we're going to get more about the mithril. I wonder now, given the way that they've treated Mount Doom, like, are we going to see Khazad-dûm fall in like the next season of this show? Like, they're running. They must have a lot of ground to cover because I know it's like 20 years, I think is how long it is from the explosion of Mount Doom to the killing of Sauron. But like, that's 5 seasons of the show, man. They're going to have a time jump from, I guarantee the next season of the show takes place like maybe 1 or 2 years after this one. It has to, right? At least.
It seems like it will. Yeah. It feels like each one of these will probably have its own thing. Maybe the 4th and the 5th season will be the same timeline, but yeah, I agree with you that the next one will be like, oh, remember 5 years ago when Mount Doom exploded?
Right.
How can I forget?
And you know what, though? Like, there are 4 names on this episode that wrote it: Nicholas Adam, Justin Doble, J.D. Payne, and Patrick McKay. As many names as there are, I really am impressed. And I know this is going to sound like fanboying, but I am impressed by how smart the Mount Doom thing was. How just like simple, just diverting water into Mount Doom. Like, all right. Like, you know what? If that was all this was for the first 4 to 5 episodes of the season, is Adar just digging a bunch of trenches for water? Okay. Like, fantasy ingenuity at its finest. It's not some magical bullshit. It's literally just diverting the water down channels into Mount Doom. Like, when that happened, I was like, that's kind of ingenious. Like, good on them. So the orcs won. The baddies won. Yeah. Cool. I like that. Like you said, I think in the 2nd or 3rd episode of the show, like, this is about the rise of evil. And I don't want things to get better. I want things to get worse, and more worse. And, Mount Doom exploding is definitely a step in the right direction if you want to see some bad things happening.
Yeah, they kind of have to get worse.
Oh,
they kind of have to get real worse.
Yeah, because the show started and everything is kind of copacetic. I mean, it's not great, but Mount Doom exploding is going to throw everything in Middle-earth, and probably not just Middle-earth, for a entire loop. Because again, like, they've been actively trying to prevent this from happening. I don't even know, in a lot of ways, you get the sense in this universe that they didn't know what the orcs were doing, because they would have stopped them. So the orcs have been kind of operating clandestinely, but people knew. I mean, people knew what was going on. They just didn't know. So the big questions that still have to be answered, like, how did that sword get there? Like, are they going to explain whose sword that was? And, again, or does it matter? I'm not sure it matters anymore. But I just want the MacGuffin to be gone because, like, this show doesn't need MacGuffins. We're about to have the MacGuffin. This show is based on the story with the MacGuffin of MacGuffins, for fuck's sake. It's the MacGuffin that's mentioned in the title. It's like the Maltese Falcon. It's the ring, and it's just as big as a MacGuffin as you can get. So, I don't know, man. I'm really excited to get into the last 2 episodes of this show, but this episode had a hell of a statement at the end, and I think it kind of nailed it. I think it definitely stuck the twist ending. So
it's really kind of weird. I was just looking at these writers, and you mentioned that there's 4 of them. Nicholas Adams has like no credits or barely any credits to his name, like a documentary called Fail State from 2017, and then this episode. And then you get John D. Payne and Patrick McKay, and they are writing partners. Again, barely any credits other than apparently they're doing a remake of Flash Gordon, which is odd, and also uncredited writers on Star Trek Beyond. And their trivia for both of them is a practicing Mormon. Like, okay, I don't see why that's relevant. And then I think it's just Justin Doble has the credits. He's the guy who has the most stuff. And even then, it's like Into the Badlands, The Path, Stranger Things, Lord of the Rings he's producing. He's writing more than that. Even wrote an episode of Fringe, Almost Human, a couple other things. But it's like these guys don't have a ton of credits, and they're all pretty darn young, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, well, and that's, I mean, we've mentioned that several times, with who's working on this show outside of, Wayne Che Yip and J.A. Bayona. Like, it's not like the biggest and best names of anybody. It's a lot of people that clearly people are putting a lot of faith in, even someone like Jason Cahill. I mean, Jason Cahill worked on The Sopranos. Like, that was, and he wrote the 3rd episode of the show, Adar. Like, everybody who has worked on this show has some creds, but they're not, it's not like Terrence Winter or Aaron Sorkin. But again, I think to your point, I think, again, the online fans aside, this is a pretty entertaining show. I think it is a complicated show, as you've mentioned with your wife several times. It's, again, like, wants you to keep track of pre-existing source material that you know about while introducing you to new characters that you should get invested in, even though some of them cannot die. And that's not easy, but I think they're doing a pretty good job with what they have, which is $1 billion and Amazon's backing. So I would hope they're doing a good job. Speaking of that, the visuals in this episode, fantastic. Look like a goddamn movie again.
Yeah, looked really good. I didn't see any special effects where I was like, that looks questionable. Not like, Book of Boba Fett or something.
Right. Another show made by a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
God, yeah. No, I don't know. I love Game of Thrones. I love Lord of the Rings. I love Star Wars. But Lord of the Rings right now is the one that's like getting, I think, its moment to really assert itself as more than just a movie series. I think it's like really asserting itself as like, we can tell a story in a serialized format that people will be interested in. And regardless of the internet trolls, the show is going to get a 2nd and 3rd and 4th and 5th season, and it can only go up from here. It really can. Like, if you think this is bad right now, subjectively, that's one thing. But objectively, I don't think you could really complain much about this show.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy. Yeah. Very happy.
And nothing else.
All right. On the next episode of the Podcast of Power, we are talking about, of course, episode 1.7. We are nearing the end of the 1st season. And yeah, Chris and I were talking before we started recording, how long between seasons are we going to have? Don't know.
A year at least. They're filming right now, supposedly.
All right.
Supposedly.
Like I said early on, I'm sure they have all these folks under contracts for years, so we don't really have to worry about losing characters through that. They probably own their firstborn. So yeah, we'll be seeing these folks around as they go through. And this is almost making me want to go back and watch, what was that one? Crawl, the Sam Raimi produced alligator movie, because the lady that plays Galadriel is in that. So I've seen that once, and that was pretty good.
There's a film that stars Barry Pepper.
It is, yeah.
What's Barry Pepper up to these days?
Oh, man, he was so hot for a little while.
Battlefield Earth's own Barry Pepper.
And didn't he play oh God, Dale Earnhardt Jr. or something. I can't remember.
Is that real? That's, I don't know.
I think so. And
Well,
then, yeah, she was in Saint Maud, which I have yet to watch, but
kind of not given much to do. I wish Galadriel was more of a character.
Yeah. I mean, she tripped that horse pretty well. And then it was kind of funny how they had to show that the horse was okay.
I know. I appreciated that. I was like, what a show made in 2022.
Yeah. I was like, you can't kill that horse. Oh, it's okay.
I feel like if I do agree maybe with the online criticisms, it's Galadriel is not much of a character.
Not yet, no.
No. And
she just is angry.
Right. I have a maelstrom within me, like, great. Or like, I forget what she says this episode. It's something to that. It's the same shit. It's just like, stop saying those things and just do something. And we see her do stuff in this episode, but it's just like, I don't know. I feel like I understand the criticism with the Galadriel character. She's not much, but that being said, the scene between her and Adar, I think, is an interesting direction that they could mine with the character of kind of placing her on the defensive about what she did and the evils that she's kind of had to allow herself to do or allow herself to sink to. So that was kind of interesting. There was a little bit of nuance, a little bit of character building there. Get her away from the Númenóreans and maybe we might see something interesting. Like, that's what it feels like. Like, let Galadriel go off and do her own thing and stop worrying about Halbrand and everybody else. And I think I might have a different opinion of her, but yeah, doesn't feel like she's being given much to do even now in the 6th episode of the show.
Yeah. I mean, Queen Muriel, she's a total wet blanket as well. And it's like, I would like to see her do something and be something because she seems like she could be a cool character.
Agreed. I mean, they gave so much to the Harfoots with the main Harfoot character, Nori, excuse me. Mm-hmm. Nori, they've given her so much. And yeah, it's like every time Galadriel opens her mouth, it's just like some badass sounding thing. It's like, no, if she's going to be our main character, like, give her more, because they've done a lot for the Elrond character. They've given him, I think it helped that they had Durin to play off of. All Galadriel's had is like Halbrand, who again seems like a character whose name we're not supposed to know because he's a twist character, or maybe not. And then all the Númenóreans who cares, aside from the ones we're told to care about. So yeah, I don't know. That's the one criticism I do understand is Galadriel's just not much of a lead. Like, Bronwyn is a much better lead. Nazanin Boniati's fantastic. Like, all right, give her some time. But even she's kind of sidelined here. So
yeah. Well, until then, Chris, where can people find you?
If you want to find the stuff I work on specifically, cstachiw.com, cstachiw.com. That's my link tree. But more importantly, all the things that you and I, Mike, work on for the most part, weirdingwaymedia.com. That's the link tree That is the website for the podcast network that we have created. And you can find all the shows that we work on, along with all kinds of other shows that you might want to check out at weirdingwaymedia.com. What about you, Mike? Where can people find you?
weirdingwaymedia.com. It's just that easy. Just go there. It's a one-stop shop, baby. Yeah.
Why do I even pitch cstachiw.com anymore? Why does it even matter? Yeah, I don't know either.
Just all weirdingwaymedia.com.
Realistically, yeah, you're right. Like that, yeah. Let me redo that then. Yeah, because you're right. There's no point. I mean, like, there is a point, but not as big of a point. If you want to find the things that I work on, which are coincidentally the same spot to find things that you work on, Mike, weirdingwaymedia.com. What about you? Where can people find the things that you work on?
weirdingwaymedia.com. Silly. Wow.
Same thing twice over. Jeez.
Yeah.
Say it once more for the people in the back. weirdingwaymedia.com.
weirdingwaymedia.com. I'm shouting it from the rooftops.
Yeah. For the people in the cheap seats.